Paul Stephen Stone enjoyed a storied career as a creative advertising professional in the Buxton area, crafting memorable brands, ads, and TV commercials for clients such as Gralic Farms, Fleet Banks, and W.B. Mawson, whose team, who bought W.B. Mawson, was Stone's signature brand creation. Stone also toured as a newspaper columnist for the Mariner newspaper for 25 years. His best columns appearing in How to Train a Rock, available on Amazon. Stone's first novel, or so it seems, is a rollicking spiritual odyssey, as one reviewer said. His second novel, Sojourner, is a spiritual thriller published by Fahrenheit Press. Both novels are two of the legs in Stone's Seeker for Truth trilogy. The last entry, How I Made My Fortune, is expected in late 2024. Stone has also written children's book, his two latest being The Wind's Tale and Cock a Doodle Don't. Stone lives in Plymouth, MA, where he's busily at work on completing his trilogy. And on today's episode of Auto Interview, it's my utmost pleasure to have Paul on the show. Welcome on the show, Paul.
Thank you, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's my joy as well to have you on the show.
Connected to Africa in the moment is very exciting to me.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, Paul, I see that you have a large body of works. You've written 7 books so far, and I would love us to start with Or So It Seems. How does this book come about? What inspired you to write Or So It Seems?
Okay, and here's the book for you folks who are curious.
Mm,
I wrote Or So It Seems after my divorce. I had a divorce when I was 41, and it took me 12 years to write it. I thought I had finished it after 7 years, but then I sent it to an agent who I knew, and she gave me some very critical advice. She said it did not have enough narrative tension. The story was basically the story of one man's divorce, and it was kind of told in a linear fashion. And
mm,
when she said that, I kind of knew what she meant. There was nothing that was compelling the reader to go forward. It just needed more promise. You needed to hold the carrot out in front of the reader. And so I went to take a climactic scene in the back and put it in the front of the story. And that's all I was
yeah.
going to change. And then without any warning, this whole other voice came into my head and started telling me what to write. And it scared me because I had spent 7 years working on this, and suddenly I was being told to, discard it. And so I made a copy of it, as you can with computers these days, very simple. And I
Mm.
just said, okay, take me where you want to take me. And this whole other story came in that was far more interesting, that actually became the first book in the trilogy that I'm working on. And I think it's much more interesting than it would have been had I just stopped after 7 years. And that's the story of Or So It Seems.
Oh, beautiful. And I even love the cover design. Looks great.
You like the cover?
Yeah, looks great.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. I also see that you have another spiritual thriller. Let's talk about your spiritual thriller, Soul Journal. And I want to say
Okay.
that it's a very captivating and compelling title. For readers who haven't read Soul Journal yet, and without giving much information away, could we have a sneak of what we would expect picking up Soul Journal?
Okay. So this is what Soul Journal looks like.
Oh,
And the reason that you have orca, killer whales on the cover, because
oh,
I asked the publisher the same thing. Why are we putting whales on a spiritual thriller? Um,
oh,
there's a concept in the book called karmic pods. And what it is souls traveling from one incarnation to another incarnation together. And because they travel in pods, uh,
oh.
the designer thought that showing a pod of orcas was appropriate. Now, saying that, you can understand that reincarnation is a big part of the story, because the reality of the story, the narrator begins speaking as one sojourner, and a sojourner is the incarnation of a soul in one lifetime. So he's speaking from his position as a sojourner to the next sojourner in his soul's journey, to
Oh.
warn that soul about one of the soul's spirits that's traveling in his karmic pod has it out for him. There's this negative force that's actually out to ruin his life. And so essentially the narrator is writing to each reader as though they were the next sojourner in his soul's journey. And that's the kind of the broad stroke of what the story is about. When you get down to the page by page, this character who's trying to figure out how things have sort of fallen apart in his life, and there goes through the marriages that he's had and the relationships, and he's constantly bedeviled by this one woman who was a Russian immigrant in America, and who basically, once she was married to him, started to control and ruin his life.
Oh.
And he's warning the next sojourner that this character is going to be after him if things turn out the way he thinks. So that's and he's writing this story from prison. He was convicted of murdering his third wife, who was the love of his life. And so the mystery behind that murder is also propelling the story. And there's I wouldn't call it shocking, but there's a surprise ending that nobody seems to expect. And it kind of brings everything together at the end. And it's fascinating to me that I wrote this story and I only had the idea of trying to show some person who's being bedeviled by this character and just trying to warn, his chain of sojourners to watch out for her. That was the basis of the story. And it has a very, as I said, it's a very surprising turn at the very end.
Yeah, I love the sound of Sojourner, particularly knowing that it's a spiritual thriller. I'm a lover of spirituality, and part of the things you talk about really piqued my interest. I was like, oh, this sounds amazing. I would love to check it out. That's amazing.
It's a very surprising story. The thing I'm very proud of with both Sojourner
Oh,
and Or So It Seems is neither of them are like anything you've ever read before.
oh,
And at the same time, they're both very engaging, and you get caught up in the stories. So they're fascinating, but they're also unique.
wow. That's great. Thank you so much for sharing about it. Now,
Not at all.
Paul, let's talk about criticism. As authors, we all have different ways of reacting to feedbacks and criticism of our works. I'm curious to know your opinion about criticism. How do you react to negative reviews of your books if you've ever had one in time past?
Uh, I have to be honest. I don't recall. I've had reviews where people have not liked specific aspects of the story. For example, my book was on online book of the day on the online book club,
Oh,
and I got a fabulous response. But there were people that didn't like the spiritual aspect. There were people that criticized a book that talked about incarnations and
wow.
reincarnation. And that kind of criticism I can't do anything about because you have to choose who you are and what you want to say and allow them
Absolutely.
to act. You know, I've never had anybody criticize the writing or the telling of the story or, basically saying they were too dull or not worth reading. So I've never had that kind of criticism. I've only
Oh.
had criticism of people that shouldn't have picked up the book in the first place.
And that's true because not everyone believes in incarnation. Not everybody believes in spirituality. Some readers
Yeah,
could even be an atheist because it happens to me as well. I'm like, oh no, I don't believe in spirituality. It's not my thing. Stuff like
you
that.
know, we live in a wonderfully strange world. I believe that we're totally surrounded by the spiritual realm, yet nobody
Absolutely.
sees it, and very few people believe in it.
Absolutely.
It sets up this great opportunity to really, it's almost like introducing a new world to people. And the trilogy, these two books are the first two books in the trilogy. I'm finishing it now. These are the first
Mm.
two. Um, the central force in these books is a school of self-development.
Oh.
Now, all through history, there have been schools of self-development where people have studied the spiritual world and tried to understand, this web that we're all part of, but we don't quite see that.
Mm.
Um, and the third book I'm writing is a story about this school of self-development's origin. The story is called "How I Made My Fortune," and hopefully it'll be finished by the end of 2024.
Wow, that's great. I love your thought about this. And it's just so sad that most people do not believe in these things. And, you been believing or not believing does not change it at all. It's reality. The world itself, it's spiritual. And it's just so sad that some people do not believe in these things. But then, you can't force an idea on someone. But the actual reality, I do say it over and over again because I'm a spiritual philosopher and I love the topic of spirituality. But it's just
Yes,
funny. It's just funny how some people cannot, understand these things. Just for the fact that they're actually real, they're reality. But we all
mm-hmm.
have different backgrounds, and human beings are different.
What they see, they won't believe in something they can't see. That's
Mm,
ultimately what's happening. But you know how I look at it, Peter. We're all traveling up a mountain. All of us, all the souls in the universe are traveling up a mountain, and
mm,
the ones that get high enough on the mountain are the ones that start to understand and see the spiritual aspects of
oh,
life. We've all been at the bottom of the mountain. We're all climbing to the top of the mountain, and when we
yeah.
get then it's nirvana, and then it's whatever comes next in this this world that we can't see.
Wow. Yeah, I love your understanding and explanation of this. They are so amazing to me. Now, you also have another book titled The Wind's Tale. Could you briefly tell us a bit about that as well?
Happily, that's The Wind's Tale, and it's a
Oh,
children's, and it's a very interesting story. The bringing this into life about 45 years ago. I was running to have an interview. I was at the time I was a freelance writer writing stories and lessons for children's
mm,
reading programs, and I had an interview set up. And before I ran out of the house for the interview, this story absolutely made me sit down at a typewriter because there weren't computers then, and it just spit itself out for me. So it has another sort of a spiritual quality to it, in that I know I never had a story that became so self-empowered that it had to come out that way. I didn't know what I was doing when I sat down
mm,
at the typewriter, but I did come up with this story. And then maybe 20 years ago, a lady, and it's a very spiritual story. It's about a boy that's basically paraplegic, quadriplegic, maybe, and a lady who worked. I was on the board of a group of um, an organization that served mentally retarded adults, and a woman who was a caretaker in the program was a fabulous artist, and she liked the story so much, she painted all the illustrations, and it's a
mm.
gorgeous book. And 30 years later, I got it published,
Wow.
and so now it's out in the world. The Wind's Tale. It's just beautiful.
Yeah, it
In
is.
fact, I'll read you just the prologue, which will give you a sense of the spiritual quality of it.
That'll be great.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
You and I, my friend, we share a secret. We know that our bodies are like houses, and inside each house there lives a quiet person who can see all the magic in the world.
Mm,
It is that person who understands the laughter of seagulls, the joy of the setting sun, and
mm.
of course, the stories told by the wind.
Wow. That's great. I love that. And a
Thank
bit,
you.
yeah, that's great. That's amazing. Now, I also see that you have another book titled The Snow That Never Fell. And I want to say that I particularly love that title. It's really captivating. Without giving much information away as well, could you briefly tell us about the making of The Snow That Never Fell?
Well, this is a good example of how intelligent the universe is. When I was looking for the illustrations for the Wind's Tale,
Mm.
I went throughout my house, places where I stored things, and in searching, I found a manuscript that I had written 20 years ago that
Wow.
was So That Never Fell. I wrote this when I was writing, or so it seems. This became a story by itself. And with Or So It Seems, when I went back to rewrite it, I put together a number of different directions that I was working with and made it into one direction and one story. And this story was one of the directions that set up the story. So it was a separate manuscript. When I found it, I read it, and I was really shocked to find out that it was not only a complete manuscript, a complete novel, but it was
Mm.
good. It was very good, to my opinion. And I've gotten some pretty good reviews out of it. I think I sent you one of those. It's a story of a father who's trying to navigate the difficulties and challenges of being a single father after divorce.
Oh.
Um, he takes his son to this event, the father son Pinewood Derby, a Cub Scout event, and there's a sad set of challenges that he fails to overcome, and so ultimately he and his son are embarrassed at this event. But it has the shadow cast by his own father's neglect and lack of visible love
Mm.
has a lot to do with the story of him trying to be the better father than his father was to him. And it's very poignant. It's also funny, a lot of laughs, and it was a story that the universe wanted me to publish. I sent it
Wow.
out to the publisher, and I got very quick response.
Wow.
Not self-published; it's published by an actual publisher.
Wow.
It's
Congratulations on that. That sounds
Thank
great.
you, thank you.
Yeah. So considering all your, levels of works, considering your bodies of works, I'm curious to know if you experienced any challenges while writing your books. If there is any, could you share with us what challenge it is and how you ultimately overcame it?
Um, my challenge in writing, writing for me is a spiritual event. I
Wow.
don't I don't plot out a novel beforehand. I don't outline it, and
Wow.
so I'm taking a lot on faith, and that
Wow.
means that there are periods when the whatever muse is working with you stops sending you stuff because she's run out of stuff. So
Wow.
you have to accept that there'll be dry periods, as most writers accept, and you have to accept the fact that the ending will arrive, and it will take care of all the events that have preceded it. The thing that's so amazing with like the spiritual process is that how appropriate the endings of these books always turn out to be, as though some guiding force saw where the book was going. Now, I've had, with Or So It Seems, maybe 2 weeks before I finished the novel, I got seriously depressed. And
Wow.
the reason I got seriously depressed was, and I realized it, was because the main character was going to die. And I didn't know that in advance. And it really threw me for a loop because I identified with the main character. Uh,
Wow.
with with Sojourner, um, there's a interruptive quality to the story where there are different narrators at different times. And I didn't know why that was happening. And I didn't know if that would ever be explained. But it
Mm.
was explained at the very, very end of the story. And as I said, it leads to a surprise ending
Wow.
that I didn't know about in advance and I didn't expect. So it's one of the things about writing a novel is that you, as well as the reader, are kind of being entertained and being informed at the same time you're writing. So
Yeah.
it's a very live process, and sometimes I'm going through a period now where I know that this novel, which I said is the third leg in the trilogy that I'm working on, needs another layer of the point of view, and I've been kind of allowing time for that to come in. So you have to be patient, you have to have faith, and you have to have time.
Yeah, that's great. I love your answer to this question, and particularly the point where you mentioned the writing is spiritual for you. That's really lovely to know. I love that.
Thank you. People make the mistake of thinking that there's some place in a writer's head where this stuff is manufactured. It doesn't work like that. I don't think there's any
Yeah,
autopsy of a brain where they've seen this is the writing room where the ideas.
yeah. That's true. I actually love that. I also
Okay.
found the Amazon description of how to train a rock quite captivating and intriguing. Would you like to tell us a bit about that as well?
I will do that happily. So this is How to Train a Rock,
Yeah, lovely.
and it's a compilation of. I was a newspaper columnist for 25 years, but my newspaper columns were not like the ordinary newspaper columns you read. They were
Mm.
short stories, they were satire, they were funny, and some of them were really good. And so I decided I would put together 50 of them in this book, and it's very enjoyable. I was looking through Google to see what stuff related to my name, Paul Stephen Stone, and I
Mm.
came across somebody that was writing to a friend and called this book a masterpiece. So
Wow.
someone in the universe thinks that this is a masterpiece.
Wow.
Now, this year, I decided to do a second collection of those columns and some short stories, and that's this Stone's Throw. That's my
Wow.
latest published book, and it's great. It has a lot of energy, and it's really surprising. The pieces I wrote um, 30, 35 years later are still fresh.
Wow. That's amazing. That's very lovely to know. Now, Paul, apart from the books we've covered so far, do you have any other works you've authored or maybe currently working on? Also, what else would you like the viewers to specifically know about your writing?
That's a good question. Thank you, Peter. I'll just point out a Cockadoodle Don't, which is also a children's book,
Children's book, yeah.
and it's a story about the farm animals getting tired of the rooster waking them up every morning.
Oh,
Uh, the only thing that I would probably want to additionally share about my writing is that I think we each have a calling, and writing is my calling. And
mm,
part of that calling requires me to share my thoughts about the spiritual world. I found
wow.
a very fresh way of doing it because the stories are all dependent on the spiritual world.
Mm,
I don't try to be didactic and teach somebody anything other than what's a good story that's built on the spiritual world existing. And the other thing is that I feel every writer has an obligation to be entertaining. As much as you have something to say, if you don't say it in a way that keeps the reader's interest, then you're not doing your job.
yeah,
So that would be the main lesson I would choose to pass to a young
yeah.
writer.
That's great. That's lovely to know. And now, as a published author, what sort of advice do you offer other writers who are still struggling with publishing a book? What would you advise people in this category?
Well, I've seen that as I've become more and more successful getting my books published, it gets easier to get them published. So there's something that allows, and this here again is on the spiritual realm because there's no external force that counts up the number of books I've written and then says, well, now you can have an easy time finding a publisher.
Mm,
I think I think if the quality is worth having a book published, then I would advise any writer today to think about self-publishing. It's so easy now, and it's so accessible to do self-publishing
Yeah.
that that will, as I say, that energy from succeeding and getting the book out there will start to fuel other efforts and make writing a lot more empowered.
Mm.
So the main thing as a writer you got to do is write, and in order to keep yourself satisfied as a writer, every once in a while you got to be able to lift up something like this and say, "I did that." You know,
Yeah.
there's
That's
the
great.
yeah, we're all driven by ego. I mean, ego is a big part of who we are. Even if we're not egotistical, we're still driven by ego. We still want to see some success from things that we've created. Uh, I've long ago given up the idea of making any money from my novels or my books.
Wow.
That's just, it doesn't work that way. I don't need it, thankfully. I have a comfortable retirement. But if there's any book that I think might make me some money or might make my heirs some money, it's Cock-a-Doodle Don't.
Wow.
Because
Wow.
it's just a kind of a fun little story that kids really like. So,
Wow. That's
but who knows?
great. Yeah, thank you so much for your advice, and I'm hopeful that viewers, including myself, would love to utilize it. Now, Paul, in case we have some interested viewers who would love to get a copy of any of your books, on what platform are they available on for purchase?
Well, they're all on Amazon.com. I don't know how that works. If I think they're in Great Britain's Amazon as well, but I can't be
Sure.
sure. But definitely Amazon.com has all the books. I even have an author's page, so you can check me out, Paul Stevenstone. Um, so hopefully they're easily accessible to anybody that has a good sense to want to find them.
Yeah, that's great. And I left a link in the discussion part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy of Paul Stephen Stone's books directly on Amazon. So thank you so much, Paul, for accepting the
Okay.
invitation to be featured on P English Literature. It's a pleasure having this conversation with you.
Well, same here, Peter, and I commend you again for doing this. This is a great service to writers and to the reading public. Thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you for your compliment as well.